Citizenship on the Go. Lesson 2. American Government. Principles of American Democracy. Part 3. Foundational Rights and Amendments. The Founding Fathers who wrote the Constitution did not believe it should be unchangeable. For future Americans to exercise self-government, they needed to have a way to make additions and revisions to the law. The Constitution gives the two parts of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives, the power to propose changes to the supreme law of the land. Changes or additions to the Constitution are called amendments. For an amendment to be made to the U.S. Constitution, Congress and a majority of state legislatures need to approve the proposed change. So far, 27 amendments have been made to the Constitution. The first 10 amendments were all made at the same time. We call these first 10 amendments the Bill of Rights. Since the Bill of Rights was added, another 17 changes have been made to the Constitution. One of these amendments repeals, or cancels out, an earlier amendment, showing that it's possible for changes to be made even to other changes to the Constitution. The last constitutional amendment to be made so far was added in 1992. Civics test question. What is an amendment? What is an amendment? A change. The word amendment means change. We call changes to the Constitution, or additions to the Constitution, amendments. Civics test question. How many amendments does the Constitution have? How many amendments does the Constitution have? 27. So far, 27 amendments in total have been made to the U.S. Constitution. When we discuss the Constitution, we are not only talking about the first few pages of the document that were written by the Founding Fathers in 1787. The 27 amendments that have been added by Congress and state legislatures in the more than 200 years that have passed since the Constitutional Convention are also part of the supreme law of the land. It is especially important for citizens and residents of the United States to know about the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. This section of the supreme law of the land contains many rules meant to protect people living in this country from having their basic rights taken away by the government. While Federalists like Hamilton, Madison, and Jay were able to convince many Americans that the nation needed a strong central government, anti-Federalists, like Thomas Jefferson, were concerned that this new, strong government would wind up taking away individual freedoms and denying states the right to make any of their own decisions. Jefferson, who had written the Declaration of Independence years before, worried that the U.S. President and Congress would become just like the British King and his Parliament if the Constitution did not include any guarantees against that happening. To get the support of anti-Federalists, like Jefferson, for the Constitution, Madison and the other Federalists agreed to add a list of protected rights and freedoms to the supreme law of the land. The first 10 amendments were all added at the same time, just a few years after the Constitutional Convention. Since these 10 amendments were about the rights of individual people in the United States, as well as the rights of state governments, we call these first 10 additions to the Constitution the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights states that the federal government is not allowed to stop people in the United States from exercising many basic freedoms Americans had been denied by the British government during the colonial period. It says that Congress is not allowed to make laws that take away the basic rights of Americans, and it protects Americans from being punished by the government for acting on their basic rights. Civics test question. What do we call the first 10 amendments to the Constitution? What do we call the first 10 amendments to the Constitution? The Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution are called the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment, on its own, contains many of the basic rights Americans count on having in order to freely participate in their democracy. The First Amendment promises Americans freedom of speech and freedom of expression, which means that it is illegal for the government of the United States to punish Americans simply for saying, for writing, or for otherwise showing what they think, even if people in U.S. government don't like someone's opinion. Freedom of religion and freedom of worship are also promised to Americans by the First Amendment. Having freedom of religion means that you are protected from being punished by the government for choosing to follow whatever religion you want, or for choosing not to follow any religion at all. Freedom of worship is similar. The Constitution does not allow the government to punish anyone for worshiping how they see fit. Everyone in the United States can practice any religion or not practice a religion without legal consequences, as long as they are not using their religious practices as an excuse to take away the rights of others. Another First Amendment right is freedom of assembly. Having freedom of assembly means that the government cannot legally punish people for gathering together in a public space. Many protesters throughout U.S. history have exercised their First Amendment right to freedom of assembly to organize marches, sit-ins, and other peaceful demonstrations. The First Amendment to the Constitution also promises Americans freedom of the press. This means that news reporters can tell the public about what's happening without fear of being fined or jailed by the government. It is not legal for the media to intentionally lie to people or knowingly spread false information, but otherwise, reporters are free to share news stories and opinion pieces with the public in the papers, on TV, through radio programs, through websites, and through other means of communication. Finally, the First Amendment also protects the right of Americans to petition the government. According to the Constitution, the government is not allowed to block the American people from voicing their complaints and requests for change. Americans have the First Amendment right to call or write to their representatives in government, to submit petitions, and to peacefully protest for change. Civics test question: what is one right or freedom from the First Amendment? What is one right or freedom from the First Amendment? Speech. The First Amendment promises Americans freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, and freedom to petition the government. It's not legal for the U.S. government to punish anyone for exercising their freedom of speech. Civics test question: what is freedom of religion? What is freedom of religion? You can practice any religion or not practice a religion. There are two parts to the idea of freedom of religion: the freedom to practice any religion you want, and the freedom to not practice a religion at all. When the 13 original colonies voted to ratify the Constitution, they were agreeing to the principle of rule of law. The rule of law is the idea that the law applies equally to everyone. Everyone must follow the law, no matter how rich they are or who their family is. Leaders must obey the law, even if they occupy positions of great influence and power. The government must obey the law, just like people with non-government jobs. No one is above the law, not even the president, state governors, or members of Congress. John Adams, who was elected the second president of the United States after George Washington retired from politics, summarized his support for the rule of law by saying that the United States needed to have a government of laws and not of men if it was going to succeed as a country. For people to have equal rights and for individual freedoms to be protected, The law must apply equally to everyone. Civics test question. What is the rule of law? What is the rule of law? No one is above the law. The rule of law means everyone must follow the law, leaders must obey the law, the government must obey the law. No one is above the law. The principle of rule of law, the protections promised by the Bill of Rights, and other safeguards for basic freedoms of Americans included in the Constitution open the way for we, the people, to participate in U.S. government and society in many different ways. U.S. citizens, for instance, choose the U.S. President, the U.S. Vice President, members of Congress, and members of state and local governments by voting. Americans can help determine who makes it into government and what new laws are made in this country by joining a political party, such as the Republican or the Democratic Party, by helping with a campaign, or by joining a civic group or a community group. The First Amendment to the Constitution promises Americans freedom of speech and freedom to petition the government, so you have the right to participate in our democracy by giving an elected official your opinion on an issue, by calling senators and representatives, or by publicly supporting or opposing an issue or policy. American citizens also have the right to run for office in order to become a part of the government themselves and participate in the government more directly. Everyone in this country also has the right to write to a newspaper, which is one way to share your opinion and possibly convince others to support your idea of what the government should do about a problem. Civics test question. What are 2 ways that Americans can participate in their democracy? What are 2 ways that Americans can participate in their democracy? Vote and run for office. Only U.S. citizens can vote in federal elections or run for federal office. But there are many ways anyone living in the United States can participate in their democracy. Some other ways Americans can participate in their democracy include joining a political party, helping with a campaign, joining a civic group, joining a community group, giving an elected official your opinion on an issue, calling senators and representatives in Congress or the state legislatures, publicly supporting or opposing an issue or policy, and writing to a newspaper. This is the end of Lesson 2 of Citizenship on the Go.